We've hardly scratched the surface of the PlayStation VR 2, and yet the platform has already seen a myriad of well-orchestrated and phenomenally immersive experiences grace its world. An upcoming game that will further bolster its hold on the market is the Foglands, a quirky-looking action-adventure game that will, at least from the looks of the trailer, take you to fog-imbued depths that are both uncharted and swarming with otherworldly entities. As it is still early days yet, it's hard to establish a clear picture of what exactly the Foglands will look like. That said, thanks to its developer, Well Told Entertainment, we do have enough key details to lay the foundations and paint a portrait. Curious to know more? Here's everything we can tell you about the upcoming VR entry. The Foglands is an upcoming VR action-adventure roguelike game by Well Told Entertainment. The game, which will cast you as a runner, heroes of a sparse community living underground, will take you to the seemingly vacant depths of a dead world that sits beneath the fog and shadows. It's your goal, in short, to tread the unknown and charter its ashen world, all the while the fog makes daring attempts to swallow you whole. Run into the unknown, fight monsters, scavenge loot, and try to make it back before you are swallowed by the fog, the description adds. The Foglands is an atmospheric roguelike adventure where you'll discover new paths and uncover old secrets. In the Foglands, you will take on the role of a runner, a courageous individual whose purpose it is to explore a network of fog-smothered tunnels in search of clues, tools, and long-forgotten secrets. On your journey, you will encounter dangerous forces that dwell in the shadows of the dead world. As one of the last remaining runners, you will need to do all in your power to not only outsmart the creatures, but defeat them to help restore balance to the underground labyrinth. A great creature reawakens in the fog, the blurb begins. With the survival of humanity in peril, you must strike a deal with a mysterious stranger in this sci-fi western horror story. Follow the network of tunnels to learn the long-buried truth, and remember, sometimes the best way to move forward is to look back. Well Told Entertainment describes the Foglands as a sci-fi western horror game, an absurdly unique hybrid of genres that will supposedly bring survival horror to a roguelite world. As such, players can expect to engage in an immersive abyss that's chock full of daring encounters and fog-covered labyrinths. In each run, you will need to scavenge, fight, and charter your moves as you gradually whittle down the mysteries surrounding the great creature that looms in the fog. According to the description, you will go toe-to-toe with strange, malevolent monsters and vicious, roving factions. And that's not all, apparently. Going by the blurb, you will also scavenge precious items, unearth hidden secrets, and collect powerful abilities that can mean the difference between victory and death. It's essentially roguelite meets Maze Runner, and we're all for it. So, which of the many teams is actually behind the Foglands, and when can we expect to see the next announcement? In short, it's Well Told Entertainment, a relatively close-knit studio that will make its VR debut with the upcoming sci-fi western horror. But as for when the next announcement will be is still very much anybody's guess. It'll be before Q4 2023, though. But even still, try and take this with a grain of salt. The Foglands was first brought to light back at the State of Play event, a live-stream showcase that lifts the veil on all the upcoming PlayStation games, VR included. Judging by this, and how the announcement was only made on February 23rd, it's hard to believe anything else will be coming to the table in the near future. That said, Well Told Entertainment has in fact said that the game will be shaping up for a 2023 launch, so there is that. Until something does pop up, though, we'll just have to keep tabs over on its social media. You can join in the discussion here. As luck would have it, Well Told Entertainment recently published a sneak preview trailer to help outline not only the gameplay features, but the general aesthetic of the game, too. Will this receive a follow-up in the months leading up to its eventual launch? Probably. However, until it does come knocking, we'll have to settle for what's already on display. Interested? You can see the most up-to-date trailer for the Foglands in the embed above. The Foglands will be coming to MetaQuest 2 and PlayStation VR 2 on October 31st, 2023. According to Well Told Entertainment, the game will also be heading to Steam VR headsets, although it hasn't been said when exactly that will be. That said, with all major VR platforms in the scope, it's exceedingly unlikely that it'll be left out of the mix for too long. In the meantime, you can go ahead and download it from the description. For more updates on various upcoming games, you can subscribe to the channel. If anything interesting pops up between now and its 2023 release, we'll be sure to let you know all of the details right here on Akatsuki. Short but satisfying, the Forest Cathedral's dramatization of Rachel Carson's research is worth a few hours of your time. Inspired by a true story. These are words you've likely seen displayed before countless films, and maybe even a few games. While that iconic notice doesn't appear before the Forest Cathedral, it probably should have. It couldn't be more apartment. The second game from developer Brian Wilson, Where the Bees Make Honey, and published by Whitethorn Games, Lake, Witchwood, this title is an accomplished and thought-provoking retelling of the scientific process behind one of the world's most important environmental publications. In the Forest Cathedral, you play as Rachel Carson. For some of you, that name may have already rang a bell. In case it hasn't, here's a quick primer. Rachel Carson is the author of the environmental science book, Silent Spring. Published in 1962, the book is considered by many to be among the most important and influential scientific publications of all time. In it, Carson outlines the damage that the insecticide DDT causes to the environment, ecological webs, and the potential harm to humanity. The book changed public perception on the use of DDT, and Carson's combined work eventually sparked the creation of the US's EPA. While Carson's real-world research took more than 4 years to come to fruition, the Forest Cathedral dramatizes this in a very different way. In the game, Rachel is tasked by Dr. Muller, the man that invented DDT, to spend a few months isolated on an island that had recently been sprayed by DDT. Her job there will be to monitor the wildlife using a sci-fi device called the IRGB. As you might imagine, she starts to uncover the effect of DDT firsthand in the insects, fish and birds. The Forest Cathedral portrays this story by blending 3D first-person exploration/narrative gameplay with sections of 2D platforming. In the first-person sections, you explore the island and go about your daily chores through Rachel's eyes. Occasionally though, she'll have to use some machinery which can't be controlled like a normal terminal or tool. This is where the 2D platforming comes in. When interacting with TV-like terminals, Rachel hands over control to her only companion on the island, a tiny pixelated person that lives within computers referred to as Little Man. The viewpoint of the game focuses on the TV screen and the platforming begins. The aim of these 2D sections is always to move boxes into corresponding box-shaped voids. In order to do that, you'll have to use Little Man's moveset, jumping, dashing, climbing up ledges, wall jumping, bouncing, and attacking, to overcome a variety of platform staple hazards. Spike pits, game-themed enemies, and crush zones stand between the Little Man and his aim. Once the box has been placed where it needs to go, something will activate within the real world. This can be like machinery gaining power or a gate opening. Most of the story within the Forest Cathedral is delivered via dialogue. Whether it's Rachel talking to herself, she gets a little quirky having spent so much time on her own, or with other characters on a radio, many of the story beats are revealed during conversations. These chats are often presented via a visual novelesque system. Pixel art versions of characters are presented next to each other as they talk. Despite offering a small degree of freedom, the Forest Cathedral is quite a linear experience. When walking around in the first-person perspective, you have the opportunity to explore the admittedly lovely-looking environments, but the area is small and progress is staged and gated. Using the IRGB device and following luminous piping, the game makes it very clear where you're supposed to be headed next. Even if you get off track, smart environmental design, coupled with the occasional invisible wall, will keep you progressing. The same can be said about the platforming sections. Little Man's path through the platforming is straightforward with the occasional branching path leading to two objectives. You'll have to reach both objectives, which means a little backtracking, but the game opens shortcuts to reduce any repetition. The platforming itself isn't particularly challenging and lacks any innovation, but it does work to break down the simple walking and exploring. The Forest Cathedral spotlights its story over interactivity. Through smart editing, quick cuts, an economic script and some reasonable voice acting, the tale is delivered succinctly and with a steady pace during its 2 to 3 hour length. Where the game succeeds is by creating an air of peculiarity and contrast. Pairing sci-fi-like devices with the surrounding nature, by offering glimpses of things that are out of place or by foreshadowing the dialogue with visual clues, the game layers a story beneath the story. If you're familiar with Silent Spring and Rachel Carson's work, some of the narrative may feel a little on the nose, but it works well as an abridged, simplified and dramatized version of events. Unfortunately, the Forest Cathedral isn't without its bugs. Perhaps aptly so. There's only a handful of them dotted around and all but one of them are visual, rather than offering any kind of impact. For example, at one particular trench of forest, there's a random floating piece of bark that looks like it should be attached to a tree. In another instance, the camera got weirdly hung up for a few seconds on some of the environment. Like I mentioned, they're all forgivable foibles in an otherwise great-looking games. One particular bug is a little more frustrating. During the most intense moment of platforming with Little Man, one of the walls becomes sticky. Touch it and you get almost magnetised to it as you bounce on a spring, surrounded by a spike pit. I initially thought my controller had broken. After plugging in 2 other pads and failing at this section repeatedly, I scratched this up to bug. After changing the way I played this section entirely, essentially fluking it, I managed to clear it. A few mild frustrations don't detract from the core message of the Forest Cathedral, however. It's incredibly rare to see a game take its inspiration from a scientist and their publications, outside of the semi-fictional versions of Tesla and the like. This source material, and the way it portrays incredibly important and often understated research, gives the Forest Cathedral the feel being a true gaming curio. If you have a few hours to spare, and you want to immerse yourself in something a little bit different, this will certainly fit the bill. It ironically has a few bugs, but the Forest Cathedral's dramatized portrayal of Rachel Carson's research into pesticides is still one worth your time. Short and succinct, the game blends narrative-focused exploration with 2D platforming into a seamless experience. While none of its component elements are particularly earth-shattering, the way they are combined makes this game more than the sum of its parts. Descent is an action puzzle climber and meditative journey where players try to reach the top of an immeasurable tall tower and uncover clues along the way. Climbing is a game mechanic that populates a wide range of titles. Despite being around for so long, climbing is rarely a main focus for any game, although developers have tried to add a stamina meter to make it more exciting for players. VR games like The Climb naturally lend themselves to making the act fun, since so few actually take up rock climbing in more dangerous places, but you have to go back to the likes of Crazy Climber in the arcades to find an example where climbing is the main objective. This is one of the reasons why Descent seemed interesting, alongside the fact that it's developed by Don't Nod, a studio that has dabbled in other genres but is more well known for narrative adventures. We got a chance to check out a preview build and came away more intrigued. Descent takes place in a world where the oceans have dried up, and the remaining people make do with ramshackle dwellings on or inside the rocks. You play the role of a nameless boy who wanders the land alongside his companion, a small, blob-like creature. He soon finds himself at the foot of a large tower of rock, and like the rest of the inhabitants of this world, he decides to climb. As mentioned before, Descent is focused all on climbing. Like the VR game The Climb, this is accomplished by alternating between 2 buttons that signify your left and right hands for gripping the next available handhold and releasing it to grab onto the next one. The game does a great job of automatically determining where your hands will go, but you can also point to exactly where you want to grab onto. Like The Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild, the game employs a stamina system where you have a limited amount of time to climb before reaching a flat horizontal surface to quickly catch your breath and continue the climb. The game does a few things for climbing mechanics that is rarely used by other games. You can anchor yourself with up to 3 pitons to prevent yourself from falling too far. You can jump from walls, but that drains the stamina and reduces the amount of stamina you can regain before finding a flat surface. You can shimmy up and down the rope to reach handholds below you and give yourself enough room to do a swing or a wall run to another handhold. At any time, you can lean on the wall to recover stamina, so you aren't always relying on large or flat surfaces to regain stamina. That last part is significant because it shows how Jusant still has its narrative adventure senses built in. Just about every climbing surface has a built-in piton that you automatically attach yourself to, so you can never fall to your doom from a missed handhold grab. You can't just walk off a ledge to your doom or purposefully jump from high places to the ground far below you. Like many games of this type, there are no enemies to fight off, so there's no fear of dying, and that puts the focus squarely on exploration and story. Speaking of story, the game is also unusual in that it doesn't present any conflict whatsoever, at least during the preview build. The different biomes can range from calm to slightly harsh, but you never get the sense that this is unnatural. There's wreckage left behind, but nothing reminds you of a great calamity. The letters you find seem like they're from a slice of life story rather than something more woeful, transforming the game into a relaxing instead of a harrowing experience. The build is still in an early enough state that bugs are expected, but we didn't experience any big issues that need fixing. Graphically, the game looks stunning, and that's all thanks to the art style. The flat colors work well for the environments and characters, while the lighting in some areas accentuates the look. The characters stand out due to their eyes, which give the game a more cozy feel due to their cartoonish appearance. On the audio side, the lack of voices, aside from grunts during climbing, means that the sound effects are doing the heavy lifting. The soundtrack is present but only shows up during cut scenes, as the ambient sounds of the world fill the speakers most of the time. The tracks are good for the moment, but we really want to hear more of it before passing judgment. For a game that's still in an early stage, the Steam Deck performance isn't that bad. The game can average 60 frames per second during cut scenes with a few small dips, but during gameplay, the frame rate ranges between the low 20s to mid 40s, depending on what you're looking at and how many objects are on screen. This is with the game set to low and with FSR 2.0 off and an unknown value for the resolution scale, so there is room to make the game run better, especially since the art style makes the title still look great at these settings. The battery life averages below the 2-hour mark, but that can be helped with a 30 frames per second lock, since this isn't the type of game where twitch action matters. Jusant feels like a refreshing change of pace for a narrative adventure game. The focus on action over dialogue keeps it interesting for those who aren't normally into these kinds of adventure games. The pieces of story that you uncover are lighthearted instead of focusing on something dour or of utmost importance to the world. It also helps that the game has a gorgeous art style. Jusant still has no formal release date, but we can't wait to check out the full game to see where the experience goes next. Stay on coup with Headbangers Rhythm Royale, a musical pigeon party. During WASD, we sat down and went hands-on with Headbangers, the upcoming musical party game from Team 17 and developer Glitchy Studio. Look, if Nintendo isn't going to give us a Rhythm Heaven game on Switch, then somebody else has to. And so, in comes Glitchy Studio, the developer behind Headbangers, a ludicrous party game featuring pigeons in silly outfits, and with up to 30-player multiplayer. It's chaotic, it's hilarious, and just like the music, it absolutely slaps. Headbangers is almost entirely music-based, though some of the 23 mini-games actually just use music to facilitate a memory game. You must make it through 4 rounds of games in this competition, in the hopes of becoming the master headbanger, and trust me, things will get silly along the way. At WASD we managed to sit down with Team 17, and enjoyed 2 different sessions with Headbangers, coming away pretty happily chuckling to ourselves, but with a few key questions. This manic mini-game collection sure is a hoot, but we're not sure yet just how much fun this is to play over an extended period of time. And crucially, there's no local co-op, it's only online multiplayer. Now, you can sit and play this on your own and have a good time, or if you're feeling the boogie, you can create a room with friends and have the game populate the rest of the 30 Pigeons characters with NPCs. We only managed to play against one other player, and while that was really fun, it's going to be really interesting to see just how mad things get with a full flock of 30 all hammering the buttons and trying to stay on the beat. One thing that gives us confidence is the strength of the mini-games, and the commitment to silliness throughout. We managed to squeeze in a game of fitness, where you follow a gym instructor's moves. The instructor stretches in different directions, and you must follow the direction, rhythm, and length of the moves. Things quickly escalate, and what seems like a simple game of Simon Says turns into a confusing assault on the senses that is just as silly as it is tough. Another game called Guess It makes you listen to a few assorted notes from a particular instrument, before choosing from a wheel of available options. Can you make out the noise of bagpipes or a few pats on a bongo? Once again, this quickly devolves into several noises in a row, and it becomes a fun game of both memory and recognition skills. Not all games have memory aspects, as that 70s race pits you and a few remaining pigeons on the top of a vinyl player, and you press buttons to match the time and particular button shown below. Imagine Guitar Hero spinning around on a record, and you're sort of there. As the game slowly whittles down players from each game, the final couple of matches get more intense and more ruthless, making those heart-pounding moments all the more intense. We enjoyed the mini-games we played, though between the 23 total, from our time with around 7 or 8, it remains to be seen if there is enough variety in the different games and whether they all feel fair. The difficulty seriously ramped up in our time, and while this is definitely focused on online play, it'll be interesting to see how much fun it is to play alone if nobody is there to laugh along with you. One element firmly in Headbanger's favor is the sheer commitment to being very, very silly. As you play, you unlock currency, known as crumbs here, and you can use these to purchase a variety of ridiculous outfits. You can slap a TV on your pigeon's belly, dress them like Ziggy Stardust, and wear a hat featuring Team 17's iconic worms. There are so many outfits to choose from, and you can even mess around and equip different parts for your legs, torso, and head. Just go mad, and have fun with it. Luckily, it's not just outfits, as even while playing, there are a few silly moments peppered throughout to keep you smiling. While waiting for the next mini-game or round, you can almost always swing around your pigeon's neck and head with a spin on the analog stick, and you even get some additional points when doing so. Then, be sure to also keep an eye out for items flying overhead in between rounds, which, if you manage to grab them, allow you extras like a bonus round or a chance to attack all your opponents. The performance felt great in our playthrough, which is great because a tight frame rate is essential for a game that demands such exact timing from players. It'll be interesting to see how the Switch's servers hold up with 30 players all simultaneously banging their heads online, but we hope it doesn't impact gameplay. The game is already tough enough, no need to throw in some performance issues to add to the load. Finally, one thing that really sells the whole package is the great sound design and soundtrack. The original music is great, adding a lot of zany energy and zest to the title, though it might be missing the sort of classic hooks that you can hum along to. Instead, the soundtrack is there to assist the hilarious pigeon voices and sounds, as in each mini-game the characters give off little noises and funny musical hums that sound a bit like Aardman's Morph if he had a few beers. We really enjoyed our time with Headbangers, but a lot of that was getting to sit next to someone and play together, which we managed with a combination of 2 Switches, 2 TVs, and online play. According to Team 17, the precision needed to master the musical games is why it's online only, as in a room full of rowdy folks, it's almost impossible for people to keep track. But, besides bemoaning the omission of local co-op, the game is a very tight experience that takes being silly very seriously. In Headbangers, there's a huge commitment to satisfying gameplay, and it pays off. The music riled me up for some very silly moments, but it's the tight controls and challenging games that are sticking out in my mind. Couple that with a really funny visual style, plenty of ways to express your silliness with outfits, and a hell of a large pool of different games, and this could be a recipe for success. Well, we've got some questions about the promising pigeon-based party, where absolutely certain headbangers is going to quack you up. That's it for our Headbangers preview for today, folks, but keep it tuned to Akatsuki for a full review in the future. If this article has got you tapping your feet, be sure to check out other games that have been released recently. A quick story here to start things off. Stick with me, I'm going somewhere with this, and I'll keep the details to a minimum. I was an exchange student to the Soviet Union, and then Russia, in 1990 and 1993. On those trips, I took several train journeys across the country. These rail journeys allowed an awesome close-up view of the country outside of the major cities that visitors might not normally get, watching out the window as small villages slid past. It also terrified the hell out of me. I'm sharing all of this because by playing Train Valley, Console Edition, I determined that my fears were absolutely justified, and I am now convinced that indeed I was riding on the edge of death the entire time I was on the Russian rail system. Of course, that conviction isn't exclusive to Russia. I now believe that all rail systems are complex beyond belief, rivaling air traffic control with the way total disasters are narrowly averted as a matter of routine. Train Valley, while it first appears to be a sim-like management game, is actually more of an insidious and addictive puzzle game. In it, players are charged with moving trains between cities in beautifully designed settings modeled after real-world historic situations. Here's how it works. Each map starts with 2 lonely cities on a map. The player must quickly lay down tracks between the 2 cities to move trains back and forth. But, with a train in City A and a train in City B, you can't just shoot them down the same track unless you want to watch them ram each other head-on in an orgy of fire and death. So you need 2 tracks, which necessitates switches. Now you can move 2 trains between the cities simultaneously, so long as you carefully manage the switches to make sure the trains aren't lurching towards each other. But then another city pops up on the map, leading to an exponential increase in complexity. Now instead of 2 possible routes to manage, you have 6. And then another city appears. And another. And another. Trains start appearing in each city willy-nilly, wanting to make their way to other specific cities. Very quickly, the player ends up with routes inside routes, and switches galore. The entire Frankenstein system is completely of your own making, which leads to a lot of cursing at your past self for your own foolish decisions. Oh, but wait, there's more. Not only do you have to keep the trains moving between their various destinations on the insane spiderweb you've created, you also have to keep them moving on time. How can you keep the pressure on the player to get the trains moving? By making them worth depreciating amounts of money, of course. There is a simple but very persuasive economic system at work in Train Valley. Each bit of track you lay costs money, $1,000 per tile for standard track, far more for tiles that displace existing structures. Plow over a farm with your train track, and you are suddenly paying $30,000 per tile. Run out of cash, and you aren't laying any more track until you put more dollars in the bank. This is done, of course, by moving trains around. Each train appears with a set dollar amount, which immediately starts decreasing as the train sits waiting to leave the station. Get the train to the correct station, and you add the current dollar amount to your bank total. Dork around too long, and that train is going to be worth much less, so it is in your best interest to keep the trains moving in an expedient manner. And that's the basic concept of the game: lay the tracks, move the trains, earn the cash. As the game moves forward, clever new obstacles appear to challenge the player to think out of the box. The first time the game tossed a river into the mix, I was completely thrown for a loop. Each level takes about 20 minutes to get through if you don't screw everything up and start over again, which I frequently did. Levels have 3 goals, stuff like earn $50,000 or move 6 extra trains. You have to achieve at least one of these goals to move on to the next level, but obsessives like myself will want to replay each level until they get a perfect score. The funny thing about Train Valley is the way that it gently puts pressure on the player to keep things moving. You can pause the game at any time to lay track and throw switches, which would lead one to believe that collisions would never occur, since the player can take all the time in the world to make decisions and execute on them. But Train Valley still finds ways to tempt the player into making bad choices. By dangling several trains in front of the player at once, the game teases the player into trying to do too much at once. One forgotten switch and it's all over. Fire and death, and loss of profit, come quickly and inevitably. The worst moments occur when you have made an error, and you have to sit and watch your trains barrel towards each other on the same track, knowing that it was completely your fault. My only grievance about Train Valley stems from the controls. The game has been ported to Switch from the PC, and I think the game has taken a bit of a hit in the conversion. The graphics are just as lovely as they are on Steam, but this is a game that cries out to be played with a mouse. I eventually learned to click through the various menus that I needed on the Pro Controller. The game is a bit too complex for my old man eyes to be able to play it in handheld mode, but I still wished I had a mouse to quickly zero in on the switch I wanted to throw instead of clicking through them one at a time on a controller. With a mouse, I could have probably performed a bit better on the fly. The controller had me pausing a lot to execute some of the more fiddly moves. But still, that's the cost that console players must pay to play this unique puzzler. While the controls are a little clunky, I can't really think of a better way to implement them on a controller. The rewards this game delivers far outweigh the half hour or so it takes to get accustomed to the unique control scheme. Train Valley, Console Edition delivers hours and hours of satisfying, brain-teasing fun. This feels like one of those games that I'm going to return to in the coming years, as it has taken up residence in my brain and shows no signs of leaving. Pity the poor people that ride my digital trains though. If they are laying there wide awake in the middle of the night, it is for good reason. I have been known to fall asleep at the Switch.